Hi everyone, and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast, coming to you from Service Management 2015 in Sydney. I'm Kirsty McGowan. I'm here with co-host Tristan Boot.
Hello everyone.
Suresh GP.
Hello everybody.
And now we're talking with Nicole Forsgren from Chef. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you.
I have to say, I loved your keynote yesterday.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it. I learned a lot about DevOps.
So I think that's a good place to start actually, because I know at our conference in New Zealand earlier in the year we got people to put their hand up and say, who's heard about DevOps, and there was a sprinkling of hands, and then there's another one not long after that. The sprinkling of hands was slightly bigger, and it seems slightly bigger here. So it's actually fine, in the service management community we're starting to see this thing, but I still don't know if we actually understand it. And I know one of the things that that you sort of do is you've sort of been described as the numbers person, I guess, of DevOps. So can you sort of maybe just start by explaining a bit about what you're seeing and some of the figures you were talking about yesterday, and how that's sort of affecting the uptake in the industry?
So I tend to do a lot of work in terms of understanding DevOps and the impact it can have on teams and on organizations. And so we are starting to see an uptick in terms of both people at least hearing the term, which I think is a great thing. Yeah. And I asked that yesterday at the beginning of my keynote, who here has heard of DevOps? And almost every hand went up. Who here knows what it is? Yeah. Less hands. Yeah. And so sometimes what we can do is say, okay, well let's do a brief overview of what it is, but now let's talk about the impacts. What do we see from teams that are really doing DevOps and doing it well, who have gone through that DevOps transformation, and what that can do for your team and for your organization? So at the organizational level, from doing studies across almost 20,000 respondents now, across several industries worldwide, we're seeing high IT performers when compared to low IT performers, so people who are really excelling at DevOps versus people who just either aren't doing DevOps or who are doing like teeny pieces of it, which means you're not really doing DevOps. They're achieving twice as much in terms of profitability, market share, customer satisfaction. They're doubling, and that's at the organizational level. So DevOps is contributing to the entire organization. Mm-hmm. It isn't just contributing to IT or service management. It's really contributing to the bottom line.
Well, that was the key point that I took away yesterday.
Yes.
It's the first time I've actually heard somebody talking about it affecting the bottom line, and that was fascinating.
And that's huge. And really it's because DevOps is an end-to-end process. It affects the entire value chain. It's dev, it's test, it's QA, it's ops, and in any kind of service management context, as long as you can treat it throughout the entire value chain. And also, it's not just automation and tooling. We need to remember it's automation and tooling, but it's also practice and process, which I think service management really has a pretty strong handle on, which gets you ahead of the game compared to several other industries. But we also need to remember that it's a cultural transformation. We have to see that reengineering shift kind of be breadth and depth. We have to see that overall. And once we do, our technical teams perform fantastically better. I mean, we see, exponential growth. We see huge impacts in terms of lead time. So when you want to change, it makes it through the system faster. We see smaller batch sizes, so changes can make it through much faster as well. Mean time to resolve, mean time to restore, mean time, anytime we have a customer service incident, we resolve it faster. And those changes have such massive impacts. Again, it's hitting the bottom line in ways that everyone can see. So suddenly now we're getting the attention of executives. We're no longer just the help desk. We're no longer just service.
There's a couple of misconceptions, and I wanted to just clarify from an expert like you. DevOps is probably only for large enterprises. It's not for small, medium-sized segments. And what's the cost involved to embrace DevOps? How do you handle these kind of questions? So
that's interesting, because now that DevOps has been around for a while, it started probably around the 2009 era. And it started with everyone saying it's only for small shops. It's only for web ops. It only works for startups, and we called them unicorns, right? Yeah. They were special little fancy one-off shops that started small and then built themselves up. So Etsy, Netflix, people say Amazon, but Amazon actually completely re-architected what they did. Yeah. And then they said, so it only worked for web ops and only worked for small shops that maybe eventually got big. And now we're starting to say, no, it also works in the enterprise. So it's working for large organizations. And we're seeing it, and again, it's not just stories, although I've got amazing stories at Disney and at Nordstrom and at Standard Bank. We're seeing this in incredible, incredible companies. But we're seeing it across, so the industry that I said, retail, banking and finance, industries, people for a long time, so not just all these industries, but also large companies and worldwide. It's not just a North American concept. Yeah. It's not just EMEA. We're seeing it all over the place. I have data from over 110 countries, dozens of industries. And so now it's funny because some people or some industries who are just now beginning to see DevOps say, oh, it's only large organizations that can put in the money, which is so funny because those of us in DevOps are saying, no, we used to think it was only small companies or only web ops. Yeah. But this transformation can make an impact everywhere.
So speaking of misconceptions, how hard can it be though? It's only dev doing ops.
Yeah, exactly. It's only give dev a pager, teach ops how to code. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. And actually, there is, being facetious obviously, but there are parts of that because you put your dev teams on the front line for a little bit once and actually it's everybody taking responsibility. It's not it helps to not throw things over the fence, and it's actually it's that cultural change, that organisation that you're working together.
Right. So I actually want to key in on something else you said there. So some of it's the communication and the collaboration, but some of it's empathy, shared empathy, putting someone in dev on the ops team so they understand the work, they understand that their code and what they're building needs to scale, but it's understanding the work and understanding the pain and understanding what's happening. Sometimes it's putting someone in ops on the dev team so that they can communicate what needs to be done. Some of it really is, so we're extending and we're trying to get better and we're trying to build and we're saying we've got some of the increased communication and collaboration from these cross-functional teams. But let's take it one step further. Let's have empathy. Let's understand what the other teams are doing. Let's try to understand what it is they're saying because they're trying to make the process better because we have these cross-functional teams. It's not just Dev and Ops, although, as I mentioned in the keynote yesterday, those tend to be the two key areas in a software development environment because those were the two that had such conflicting goals. Dev wants to introduce change. Ops wants to maintain stability by stopping change. So if you're in a slightly different environment that's not development, try to find the two areas that possibly have conflicting goals. Make sure they can really, really understand and have interactions and communication that's good, but then pull everyone else in. You have security, you have regulatory, you have compliance, you have QA, you have testing, you have user experience.
Because that change bit is still the bit that causes the most. Every time I talk to anybody about DevOps, it's like, you've got this rapid development,
change all the time.
DevOps, Agile, all that kind of stuff happening, and you get to the change, and that's the change bit, and it stops, and that's where I found the point you made yesterday absolutely fascinating about actually, keep cab for the communication, that kind of stuff. And actually somebody responded to one of my tweets last night, and maybe the more strategic stuff, but actually bring in the peer review side of it. And that's because, and I've been working with some change managers recently and talking about similar kind of stuff. It's like the people who are doing the changes and their peers are the ones who know what they're doing. They're the ones who've got the knowledge. Bringing them all into a room with some business people is not necessarily going to...
Yeah, I liked the way you described the cab as being too many layers away from what was actually happening. That they're just too far removed from
even if they used to do that work. I used to do work in hardware. I have a hardware patent, but that was years ago, maybe 08 or 09.
Yeah, and in this
industry, me to do that now.
Yeah,
that's
in this industry, that's a long time
industry.
ago.
So if I shouldn't be reviewing that type of work now.
No,
exactly.
And I had a very positive response in terms of the workshop that went across in the DevOps just on Wednesday, I believe.
Yes.
So how was it? How was the team? Because you're meeting different cultures and you look at how people are embracing those kind of stuff. So how did you feel the workshop went through, and how was it looking like, and how was the structure looking like?
So the workshop was on building a DevOps culture, which is also one of those things that's a little bit difficult because building a culture is about looking at what you have and building it appropriate for your context. There are always going to be things that are generally good and helpful. And so I really, I also brought up that Western organizational culture model. We want to have at least those 6 key points that are good, and now I'm going to have to think of them off the top of my head, but Failure leads to inquiry. Failure's not a bad thing. We can learn from failure. Communication across silos is key and is encouraged. Messengers are trained and not shot. Novelty is implemented. Novelty is seen as a good thing. Those types of things we always kind of want to see. Exactly how that looks in each culture and each company might look a little bit different. And that's okay. And so we kind of started the day with like a quick refresher, and the icebreaker, this was a new one I've used, but I really liked it. What's your name, and what company do you work for, and what animal would you use to describe your culture? And why? Because there's not a right or a wrong necessarily. There are definitely dysfunctional cultures, but there are also several functional ones that are good, but they will have slightly different personalities. And so, we can start there, but then we also kind of went through the Western model. Where do you think you fit now, just based on the titles? And so I used, power-oriented, rule-oriented, and trust-oriented. We also call it performance-oriented, but I thought that was going to be, everyone wants to perform well. And then we went through and we actually took the assessment to say, how does your team perform? And then we walked through that and we talked about different things we can use. So if you are generally performing well on all the assessments, but you're pretty low on failure leads to inquiry, you can start doing simple things to encourage embracing failure or just learning from failure, like blameless postmortems, which in an Agile framework, it looks a lot like a retrospective, but you start with a timeline. And you just don't blame. Always start with, for example, the retrospective prime directive, which is basically, I assume everyone did the best they could given their abilities at the time.
So nobody sets out to do a bad job, do they?
Exactly. And so we tried to start with keys and tips and tricks that we can do, have metrics because it enables communication with a baseline that's not biased, it's not opinions, it's not how I feel, these are the numbers, what does this communicate to us?
Yeah, we could actually carry on talking for ages.
I love talking
We
about
haven't
it.
even talked chaos monkeys.
I loved chaos monkey.
You don't choose chaos monkey chooses you.
So, but I hope we can actually get you on another podcast. Hopefully the podcast team may very well be at the DevOps Enterprise Summit later in the year.
I'd love to.
So we'd love to chat to you again.
Sounds
so
good.
Thanks a lot for your time today, Nicole.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.